Welcome to the Institute of Jewish Knowledge and Learning. We are with Rabbi Akiva Mann as he continues guiding us through A Guide for the Perplexed, the book that changed Judaism. Take it away, Rebbe.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone had a lovely Purim. We certainly, I was telling Kim before, firstly, Shalom Aleichem, Kim. Well, to the other side of the pond. How was your trip? Great?
Except for the broken foot, you know, and Sicily is
except for the broken foot, everything was wonderful, huh?
Broken foot. It was a love. It's that blending in to this new normal. They were checking. They called it a green pass, but they checked COVID cards. They were very strict about masks. So it was interesting to see how how other countries are dealing with COVID fatigue in a world where COVID is not quite in hiding.
Okay, good. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a good Purim. Purim here, in Jerusalem, in Israel in general, Purim is it's palpable. You can there is a layer of there's a certain kind of consciousness that you can feel on the streets of Purim, and that helps the individual. It helps the individual resonate more with the vibrations of history, of Purim, I'm sure Ukraine, the tragedies that are occurring in Ukraine very much was in the air over Purim here. A people threatened over 2,500 years ago in Shushan, Iran, and today an entire population, an entire country being threatened today on the verge of destruction, and the parallels were very stark. Okay, friends, we ended last week with I think what we're doing here with Maimonides in this whole series is at the end trying to define for ourselves on the most intimate level, to ask ourselves the question, who is my God? Who is my God? And we're going through it, and again, if we come up with any conclusions, then I think we're all fooling ourselves. if we come up with straight, conclusive facts, then I think we have missed the point. If we are able to say at the end of this process that we have a more refined idea about who is my God, that we have eliminated some fallacies about divinity. If we are able to say that, we have eliminated some distortions from our imaginations, that we have personalized the idea, that we have sophisticated a kind of linkage that is going to be more relatable to us, then I think we have accomplished a great deal. So we ended off last week where we were describing the Aristotelian and Maimonidean idea of divinity, where I think this is an important idea to keep in always in our consciousness, that even when we are talking about let's say, for example, a merciful God, any normal person wants to believe in a merciful God, right? We do not want to, we do not, or maybe cannot believe in an unmerciful God. But when we say that God is merciful, God is loving, according to Maimonidean and Aristotelian thinking, and I think there's an important point to keep this in our subconscious, even when we are speaking on that level, the philosophical way of looking at divinity, even when we speak about God being merciful, we would be doing that as a result of, friends, listen, of moral qualities of mercy within us that we are transposing to divinity. But according to Maimonides, strictly speaking, divinity cannot be described as merciful, strictly speaking. Because, ask me why? Because mercy ultimately is a transposing of a human emotion that we call mercy upon an entity that is above mercy. that is infinite. And no human attribute can be attributed to infinity. And also, because mercy has its opposite, and the whole idea of compassion and mercy and love, as we concluded last week, has to do with these are words that are, in Maimonides' mind, are absolutely human. And Maimonides believes, and Aristotle believed, in a divinity that is so transcendent that you cannot talk about these human emotions. That the essence, and I think that's we are bordering on talking about a cosmic divinity that many other traditions actually adhere to. Many other traditions. I'm talking about Zen Buddhism. I'm talking about all of the cosmic traditions that place divinity in a kind of place that is not to be in any way confused with human emotions. Maimonides' God is impossible. Maimonides' God is impossible. Maimonides' God is ayin. And I'm using a mystical term, friends, but his conception of God is ayin. What is ayin? Which in plain simple Hebrew is nothing, the big nothing with a capital N. It means, in Maimonidean perception, divinity is a being, is an energy of absolute transcendence, eternal, infinite, and also unchanging. And I think it's vitally essential to keep that idea, that perception of divinity in mind at all times. I think that is part and parcel, is the first half of Shiviti, Adonai Lenegdi Tamid, especially as we are going to enter into a totally new and different paradigm. I think it's important to know that whatever in Maimonidean language, whatever we say about God is probably a human distortion. That's basically what he is saying. And why must we shift? Why do I feel that we have to shift into over and above Maimonidean thinking and shift into a new paradigm. Because if we accept the Maimonidean philosophical assumptions and study their conclusions, then I believe we are left in a place where we can no longer say that God cares or that God loves. And that, my friends, is a problem. The Maimonidean perception of divinity, I don't think we can speak anymore about a personal God. And that, my friends, is what I would like to focus on for the next 3 classes, is the difference between our perception, our intuition, our connection to a divinity, to a cosmic force that remains on one level. Magadlu Masecha Hashem, how unbelievable this world is. And that there was an initiator of all of this. The difference in our mind between a cosmic God and a personal God is going to make all of the difference in your lives. If we, according to Maimonidean perception, only are restricted to a cosmic divine force, and we are unable to make any human projections about that force, about that divinity, that makes God impossible for me. So a new mystical paradigm had to be introduced. Maimonides was born in 1135. A new mystical paradigm had to be introduced from the 12th century and forward, culminating in the 16th century and the 17th century. A new mystical paradigm is something quite different than that of Maimonidean and philosophical thinking. And that is, this whole new paradigm can be summarized in the expression of the God of Israel, Elohei Yisrael. Elohei Yisrael means that there is a perception of God that is a living God, a God of pathos, that does not and cannot fit and certainly cannot be reconciled with the philosophical God of Aristotle. And we're going to talk a lot about the God of pathos. The mystics and Chassidut that came after the mystical era warned us of the dangers, friends, of abstract thinking. that abstract thinking, they said, often fosters a split between, and this is important, between situation and idea. It's a whole, that's fodder for a whole other like lecture series. Think of those two words, situation and idea. We can have ideas in our mind, believe in those ideas rule our lives. We choose to have ideas ruling our lives. But you know, it sometimes gets in the way and challenges and sometimes destroys ideas. What? Situations. And sometimes the reverse. Sometimes we find ourselves in a situation, and the only thing that is going to bring us out of a catastrophic ending to the situation is an idea. Sometimes situations can destroy ideas, and sometimes ideas can affect our situations. So the relationship between situation and idea is a very interesting one. But the mystics insisted that to the Maimonidean way of thinking and the Aristotelian way of thinking, that you are creating a conflict between ideas and situation. And they said, to limit God, divinity, to the realm of thinking, especially human thinking, to maintain theoretical ideas that about divinity that do not involve us at the core of our being is simply wrong. An idea or a theory of divinity can easily become the idea can become a substitute for divinity. It might be impressive to your mind, but when divinity as a living reality, as what we spoke about before, as a presence is absent from the soul, that's when divinity becomes irrelevant, say the mystics. If you Maimonides, say the mystics, if you Maimonides can speak about a transcendent God, a cosmic force, a cosmic energy that only speaks to me in theory and that does not speak to me personally at my core, I don't need that God, say the mystics. To the mystics, this term, the God of Israel, Elohei Yisrael, is different from the God of Aristotle or the God of Kant. One is a doctrine of God as taught in that language. And the God of Israel means and connotes a divinity which is intimately involved, an involvement transcending the realm of thinking. I'd like us to comment for a moment that to philosophically conclude, that means through the process of intellect, through the process of thinking, to conclude that there is a prime mover there is a creator of the universe, and to philosophically and rationally and logically be able to come to that conclusion, the mystics are saying does not do me any good unless I can enter into relationship with that being, that source. It doesn't do me any good. And the mystics start grappling with the idea, so if this God, divinity, if this divine source is so transcendent, how can we get in touch? It cannot remain out there, say the mystics. And they vehemently disagreed they had to disagree with the Maimonides. They didn't disagree with his philosophical ideas. But what they did disagree with Maimonides is we have to take it to another level. We have to bring this idea of transcendent divinity down to earth, or else we cannot live with such a divinity. And that divinity is very holy and very pure. It's an Ein Sof. It's a very in essence it remains true and remains pure. But the mystics really very simply said that what can we do with this God? What can we do with this divinity? How can we experience this divinity? How can we grow through this divinity? The term Elohei Yisrael that appears a multiplicity of times in not only in Torah but in Tanakh. Just think of the two Hebrew words, Elohei Yisrael, the God of Israel. And it's not only referring to Jews here, because we have references. God is speaking. God, so to speak, is speaking to Israel when he says Elohei Yisrael. But there are expressions Elohei Ha'amim, the God of the nations. So we are saying the God of the nations, the God of Israel. What the mystics are saying is that this term is, in essence, is not pointing to a theory about divinity. It's not talking about a notion about God, but Elohei Yisrael or Elohei Ha'amim is pointing to relationship, which changed everything from a philosophical view into a covenantal, into a relationship idea. The mystics said proofs about divinity are dismissed, are irrelevant. What is relevant is the partnership, is the relationship that we as human beings, of how we are connecting to transcendence. Let me quote you something beautiful. This is from the mystical camp, and I'm quoting to you from Heschel, who Abraham Joshua Heschel is the 20th century representative of the mystics, no less than the mystics of the Ari in Tzfat in the 16th century. It's all the same theology. And this is what he writes about the transcendent God that is unapproachable, the cosmic energy that many traditions are talking about, that exists in the world, but yet has no active relationship within the world. This is what Heschel writes. Granted that the existence of a being endowed with supreme genius and wisdom has been demonstrated, the question remains, why should we, poor creatures, be concerned about him, the most perfect one? We may indeed accept the idea that there is a supreme designer and still say, so what? as long as a concept of God does not overpower us, as long as we can say, so what? It is not God, it is not God that we are talking about, but something else. Friends, I love that quote. Talk to me all you want about a transcendent God, but if that transcendent God does not have something to do with my life, then our conclusion has to be, so what? So what? If I cannot personalize this divinity within me, b'chol levavecha, b'libi, in my, if I can't personalize this God, then I have to conclude, so what? Say the mystics to Maimonides. I don't think totally to Maimonides, more to Aristotle. Because there's no way Maimonides did not have, that's going to be my conclusion at the end of all of this. There's no way that Maimonides could not have been also thinking of what the mystics are going to be introducing later on in contrast to his what he writes in the guide.
Rabbi Akiva, do you want an introduction?
Yes.
Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Micheline.
So doesn't this then go back, whoops, trying to lower my hand. Doesn't this then go back to the question by the different groups of who wrote the Torah, man or God? Because if man created the statement, God of Israel, it certainly has a different meaning than if those words came from God.
I don't see why it would make a difference, Micheline.
No.
I think that the mystics would answer you. That is actually the chidush in the Torah, that the Torah wants to portray the transcendent God, the creator of heaven and earth, but not leave it at that. But this is, I think, what the mystics would respond. The whole chidush of the Torah and revelation, divine revelation of Torah, is to introduce this Elohei Yisrael. I am not only the creator of heaven and earth and leave you to do as you may, but I am creator of heaven and earth that is going to be portrayed in this Torah as Elohei Yisrael and Elohei Ha'amim. I am somehow, I am going to have something to do. I'm not creating and then abandoning. I am going to be infusing my presence in your lives. And that is the chidush of the Torah.
But doesn't the fact that in the Torah it repeatedly talks about God with varied emotions. So isn't that then, that's what the mystics are saying, but seems to me that it's the opposite of what Maimonides is saying.
It is the opposite of what Maimonides is saying, and Maimonides, that's what makes Maimonides it makes his assumptions very difficult. I love those assumptions. I'm afraid that his expectations of our conception of divinity is impossible. He wants us to believe that the attributions of God's, of all of divinity's kind of anthropomorphic reactions in the Torah are all metaphorical. That ultimately they are all anthropomorphic, and they are there only because we cannot understand. Like it would be impossible to convey anything about the transcendent God. And the mystics, Micheline, you kind of like hit the center. The mystics are saying we are going to conclude. Let me go on, because the rest is going to be like basically a little bit of a commentary on your question, Micheline.
Okay, thank you.
Sandra is nodding her head, but you want to wait until it goes on? Because when you go on, I would like for you to comment on how could there not be an immanent aspect of divinity when we are created in the image of God? And isn't Elohei Yisrael,
Elohei
Yisrael, isn't that also just a way of describing that immanence that comes from God's that essence of divinity within us?
Also, excellent question. I think we're gonna. I think you're asking questions that I anticipated and that I'm going to unravel.
Okay, so please take it away, Rabbi.
Okay. So this quote from Heschel means that one can. It's so ironic. It's so ironic and funny. One can believe in a supreme being, in a supreme designer, as we spoke before, as Einstein at the end of his life did. He concluded there was a supreme There has to be a supreme designer. Yet, one can find themselves in a situation where we believe in a supreme designer, and we actually can connect with this cosmic creator, yet we, as human beings, we don't cease to be kind of haunted by a fear, this existential fear of futility as human beings, a fear that cannot be overcome by a transcendent God, by an ayin, by a keter level. The human being, we can be talking about keter level until we're blue in the face. The transcendence of the cosmic ayin, of the cosmic Ein Sof. And you know what? We can still be haunted and in fear of futility of life. Mazel tov, there's a transcendent energy, there's a transcendent God. There, Keter exists. Mazel tov. Mazel tov for Keter, not for me. I find myself in fear of purpose. I feel myself in fear of and in anxiety of futility of life. So the mystics introduce the idea that although the transcendent ayin, the transcendent keter, does exist, is a reality, but from our point of view, we are more anxious, and this is an important point, Chevra. We are more anxious when we speak about divinity to know whether there is a God of justice rather than to learn that there is a God of order, like Maimonides and Aristotle. Is there a divinity? Is there a force that collects our tears? Is there such a God in our purview? Is there a being? Is there a cosmic force that collects tears? Is that in our envisionment, in our purview? Who oversees our hopes? The mystics insist it is to and about that divinity who cares for us, who cares for the vulnerable and the downtrodden, that the Torah and all of Tanakh's revelation attests to. The prophets talk about do not necessarily talk about the creator of heaven and earth. The prophets talk in a different language about divinity. They want to know about the God who takes care of the widow and the orphan, and who takes care and who somehow has a finger on 3 million refugees who in 4 short weeks are fleeing for their lives. That is the God of the prophets that the prophets address. A divinity that matters to human beings. Chevra, listen. A divinity that matters to me, you, and everyone else, to human beings, say the mystics, must be at bare minimum alive and not inferior to us in order of being. The mystics insist in absolute contradistinction to Maimonides' transcendent God. Maimonides' ayin, and I'm using a mystical term for Maimonides, but I am convinced that Maimonides' God was the same God as the ayin of the mystics. The difference being, the mystics were less interested in the cosmic, transcendent, impossible God, and more interested in schlepping divinity down from Keter into immanence. I don't care what's doing up in above the 7 levels of heaven. I that is not my concern. My concern is how heaven can be felt and be experienced here on earth, say the mystics. It was the philosophers that kept God in heaven. It was the mystics that schlepped divinity down to earth, so divinity can take on some semblance of human recognition. And that is why the mystics insisted that God, divinity, enters into relationship. And that's a key word, friends, into relationship with the world. An inanimate God to the mystics was irrelevant. A divine being that lacks the attributes of personal existence, that lacks those attributes, as Maimonides insists on, God has none, is to the mystics were irrelevant. Elohim Chayim, a living God, is relevant. So it turns out that Aristotle's God, divinity, turns out to be is less than human, not more. So, friends, is there any doubt? Is there any doubt then that the whole medieval philosophical enterprise, including Aristotle, but also including Maimonidean philosophy, just had to give way to a theological disposition that had to include intuition, perceptions, relationship, and radical anthropomorphism. Something had to change in the medieval, from the medieval philosophical points of view. And the mystics, and I believe the masses, insisted this cannot be our God, the way you're describing it, because it has nothing to do with intuition. It has nothing to do with relationship. It has nothing to do actually, or it has little to do with immanence, and has all to do with transcendence. And the way of thinking of the mysticism that grew out of medieval philosophical tendencies started emphasizing and focusing their attention that the God of the medieval philosophers is a sterile, insensitive, remote God. And this we cannot tolerate. Friends, isn't it as clear as day to you, especially those of you who have taken over the years some Jewish mystical thought with us? Isn't it as clear as day that the Lurianic introduction of the spherotic tree of life was the prime model of the anti-philosophical trend that they were used to for the last few centuries. The Lurianic spherotic tree of life, as that was introduced. I mean, it was introduced in the 12th century, but by the Zohar, but it was marketed and publicized by Lurianic mysticism in the 16th century, when the spherotic tree of life is introduced, yes, including Ein Sof, including Keter, the most transcendent included in our cosmic perception. Had to be. But right after Keter, right after Chachma and Bina, what do the mystics do? They cannot be left with those remote, transcendent ideas. They start bringing the divine perception down to earth when they start talking about emanations and characteristics and attributes of divinity, starting from chesed and going down the Sphira chart from from the seven. They don't really want to talk about Keter, Chachma, and Bina, where Maimonides only wants to talk about the unapproachable Keter, Chachma, and Bina. And the mystics say we just cannot deal with that. But let's at least start with perceiving divinity in terms of Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. Let's start talking about emanations and characteristics and different perceptions of the divine. And the mystics insisted in great opposition to Maimonidean thinking. The mystics insisted in speaking in language that, I have to say, humanized divinity. And I have to explain what I mean by that. But there is no doubt that the mystics humanized divinity by talking about the mirroring effect of divine chesed in divine mirrored through humanity, about divine gevura, the energy of gevura being mirrored within ourselves, within our neshamas, with correlating divine attributes into human attributes and serving as mirroring effects. In one sense, what they were doing was they were creating divinity out of humans and humanizing divinity to an extent. And when I say humanize divinity, God forbid, I'm not talking about idol worship. And I'm not talking about Jesus humanizing divinity. When I say humanizing divinity, I simply mean, and I focus on the idea that divinity is not a supreme entity, is not a supreme being that is apathetic or indifferent. That is so cosmic and so infinitely out of our reach that it becomes out of our reach. But rather, we are talking about a divinity is one who so mysteriously, so invisibly, so organically enters into relationship with man. And actually, friends, in the mystical idea, they took it much further. Not only enters into relationship with humankind, but depends on humankind to accomplish the ultimate goal. Remember last week, God needs man. Needs. They were not afraid in that sense to in language, in anthropomorphic language, to say, I never knew that there was a God concept where God needs. What do you mean God need? They said, I know the mystics say, I know it's a great leap, but this is the leap that you have to take in order to create a perception of relationship in order to enter into partnership. Because the mystics believed without partnership, if you're going to, without partnership, everything is useless. So there's a transcendent God that has nothing to do with you, that does not enter into relationship with you. That God, say the mystics, is mamish, useless and irrelevant. So the mystics' perception of divinity, and I think we can use the word perception because everything we're talking about is still a perception. The mystics' idea for the accomplishment of the divine goal, the divine grand design, is an enormous chidush, that God needs man, and you know what? Divinity is waiting for us. God is waiting for you and me. And God's waiting for you and me is God's need for man. While this waiting is taking place, the mystics intuit that they portray divinity being hurt, even. The anthropomorphism is unbelievable in mystical thought. Maimonides would be screaming a gewalt against the anthropomorphism that the mystics introduced into the divine perception. The mystics viewed divinity, God, as waiting for us. And while waiting, being maybe a shtickle disappointed in us. And also being hurt by us. Divinity being hurt. Because we, as human beings, we have free will. And we have free will to turn away. And we have free will to procrastinate. And we have free will to do anything that we want. We have free will to enter into a free country and claim it as our own. We have free will to do anything we want. And there is a divine waiting for us to come to our senses. The mystics introduced in mamish contradistinction to Maimonides, they introduced this is what Heschel kind of his beautiful encapsulation. The mystics introduced a God of pathos, a divinity that feels, a divinity of intimate relationship, And it is this kind of perception that is the chidush, it's the chiddush that defines the Torahs and the prophetic consciousness of God. This is the silver lining that the mystics unearthed from Micheline, from the Torah, because it wasn't apparent, it wasn't all that apparent.
Do you want to take a couple of hands or finish this?
Yes,
thought?
please.
It's our Sandra's, Postlins, and then Fruitman, and then Michael.
My hand is up too.
Okay, sorry.
I wanted to say something to you because I love Maimonides, and I think that he was one of our rare geniuses. I also want to—
Same here.
Yeah, okay. I will also want to say, and I have not really studied very much mysticism, but I love Heschel, and I love what he has to say about it. What I have to say about it is, and I really don't know who wrote the Bible. I have no clue. To me, it doesn't matter. What matters to me, most of all, is one thing that I keep going back to. No matter where I am studying, I keep going back to when God put his breath into man. And that was the sweetest gift that I carry. How could I not believe in this God? How could I walk along and not know how to recite a prayer from the Torah and still be able to talk to God as if he's walking with me? And that's why I'm really interested in learning more about the mysticism, because that's my God. That's who I know, and he knows me.
Sandy, that's exactly what, you know, the emotion of the mystics that insisted on a pathos relationship with my God, with our God, a pathos relationship as opposed to a dry and remote relationship with a philosophical God. Okay. And I love Maimonidean. I think they are so, they might seem at on one level as contradictory, but I do not see them as contradictory. I believe that Maimonides withheld some stuff. He viewed his generation as a generation that was terribly influenced by philosophical Greek thinking, and approached he used a philosophical ways to meld together Judaism and Aristotelian philosophy. But according to the mystics, Maimonides wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong. Nothing that he said was in contradiction. They just simply claimed he he did not go far enough. He left divinity in the field and in the perception of a rash of what was very common in his day in terms of rational acceptance. And they said, no, it is not only our purview, our perceptions of divinity cannot be restricted only to the rational. We have to start introducing at least a divinity that knows of that identifies with human love, human emotions, called love, called compassion, called or else the bridge is too far between us. And the mystics attempted to bridge it closer. Some said, on the other side, the mystics went much too far in terms of anthropomorphizing God and talking about how God hurts when we miss the mark, when we find ourselves far away from our partnership spiritually with divinity. God is hurting. So some feel the mystics went way too far and restricted Jewish mysticism for those that were 40 years of age and blah blah and knew everything, blah 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 blah, right? So there were objections to Maimonidean. There were objections to the extent where mystics went. I like to take both Maimonides, the what he has taught us about whatever we're going to say, whatever the mystics are going to say about God. Always remember about transcendence, that God is above, 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 Ein Sof, Keter. And let the Maimonideans know that God cannot remain in that isolated, transcendent place, but we have to, like the mystics say, we have to schlep divinity down to our level. And if we have to anthropomorphize, to start feeling and experiencing a God that is immanent, that is living within our beings, and to connect to the God that is dwelling in your heart, that
Rabbi
is
Akiva.
Tselem Elohim Mima'al Mamish. There is a divinity that is living full time in our hearts and in our minds, and that we in the most intimate and most organic manner feel, experience, and get to know that divinity that lies within. If we can combine all of that and not make a machlokes out of this, but take the good from all of it, take all the nectar we can from Maimonides and from the Ari and from the Baal Shem Tov, only for the one purpose of feeling divinity, feeling ourselves it really exploding with the sparks of divinity, then we will have accomplished our purpose.
With only 9 minutes, that actually was a great summation. but Sandra Fruitman, Michael Selzer, and Marilyn Schwartz. Go for it.
Rabbi, it's a bit of a conundrum. It just seems so simple if you look at it this way. The sages knew that the people would not accept a God that had no interest in them because that's how they felt. So they were very pragmatic. So they thought, what can we do to make the people accept God? We can bring him down to their level. So who's right? Aristotle?
I Sandy, you're so pragmatic. I love it. But I hate to quote the Jewish, the traditional. You're both right. That's what I am saying. You're both right. To maintain the transcendence and impossible comprehension of what we know, what we know to be a truth. Like I quote all the time Heschel. If I would be able to comprehend totally my God, if I would have a full understanding of my God, I would not want to believe in that God that I can totally understand. So to believe in transcendent, Maimonidean transcendent God, and to believe in the mystical immanent God that I can actually talk to when I'm alone, when I'm in fear, when life scares me or when life leaves me alone, I can talk to that God. Lo ira ra ki ata imadi, I will fear nothing because you are with me. The God of the mystics who insists that the transcendent God is with us. I say, Sandy, both.
That's so Jewish. It is such a
Thank you.
Jewish thing to say.
Thank you.
Okay, Michael, and then Marilyn, and then next week.
Okay. Good afternoon. Good morning to everybody. Yes,
Hi,
so
Michael.
Jewish. That's a wonderful 2 words. So Jewish. I love it. And compassion comes into that. You know, being compassionate, being Jewish. To me, right now, this wonderful talk this morning. It's the bottom line is compassion at the moment. You know, very often, but certainly right now. And so, what I see a couple of analogies for myself, or metaphors. I've been picturing the difference between the experience and doctrine, and taking the let's call it the older doctrine from Maimonides and the experience of the Hasidim.
Very nice. Very
And
nice.
combining that together in picturing it like a railroad track. And we have one track is man, woman, and the other track is God. And we have the railroad ties connecting the 2 tracks together. And sometimes we're on the God track, sometimes we're on the human track. And that we go up and back, and that the Maimonidean railroad tie connected us from one side to the other. And then we got a different experience, and then we went to another track, and now we have the Hasidic track. The Baal Shem Tov connects us from one side to the other. And it's like a car jack, where you jack it up and down, and you go up a little bit and down, and up a little bit and down. And as Rabbi, when you mentioned the word humanized divinity earlier, which was a key thought that struck me, we're taking the philosophy, the doctrine, and humanizing it, bringing it down into the level of humanity through the 13 attributes, through compassion. And then when we get to the point of maybe filling up to a point where we've gotten as far as we can go with that humanization, we go back to the theoretical doctrine. We go back to the Maimonidean thinking of it's beyond, it's outside, from a Buddhist perspective, beyond, even beyond that. And then when it gets to be too ethereal, somebody or something or some group brings it back down it again. And
Beautiful.
it's another wave of Hasidut that comes through. And we just keep
You-
jacking it up and back, going up and down. Whenever we need one, we go to the other. But the experience of it's like I need to believe in God. If I believe in God, then I can be compassionate. Or I can just have the experience from a experiential point. We now in our society in 2022 and for years before, but now more masses of people have the ability to take the experience rather than the doctrine and have our own personal experience of God. As Rabbi Akiva, you said earlier, what is our personal experience? How do we connect with God personally rather than from an ideological standpoint? And it's that personal experience that draws us into of the caring God, because the non-personal, incompassionate God is used to be helpful, maybe to go from a standpoint, in a society where it was all the doctrine, it was all Lord, was going to do it this way. This is what you're going to believe, and this is what's going to happen to you if you don't believe it or if you don't do it. And we went through that as a stepping stone to get to the point where we can take our own personal experience, and then how does our personal experience connect into what we used to just believe as a belief? And that goes through philosophy and bringing it
Beautiful,
down into
Mike.
deconstructing it into experience.
Absolutely beautiful. For those that are taking notes, Mike, what you mentioned two. You mentioned the two parallels of that I was trying to remember when I spoke about the dichotomy between situation and idea.
Mhm.
At some points in our history, in human history and in our personal history, sometimes ideas are prominent, and sometimes our situation guides and leads our lives, and it is this merging between idea and situation. And you use two different terms, experience and that paralleled beautifully idea and situation, and you used
experience and doctrines.
Doctrine and experience. Doctrine is the idea, experience is situation. So those two, but I think I like doctrine and experience better than idea and situation. But they're both the same thing. When they merge, that is the Tiferet zone. That's when Chesed, Gevura is the doctrine, Chesed is the experience, and when they merge, it merges into a beautiful thing that historically had to merge. Mysticism necessarily had to be born out of the philosophical, intellectual vessel.
Thank you.
And Marilyn, I see you shaking your head.
Okay. Many years ago, I said, I can't imagine a world without God. And now I see that God is as important to me in my comfortable kitchen as it is to the 3 million refugees you talked about. And as the other woman said, that Maimonides was one of the rare geniuses. I really feel that we are all equal to Maimonides in the sense that we're all instruments of God. Maimonides nourishes my soul and my thinking. The man who invented the icebox or the refrigerator helps me nourish my body. And I feel very democratic about my relationship with God. The last thing I would say is that the first 3 commandments tell me what I should think about God. And I say God is whatever I vision God to be. And nobody can tell me how to form or think or create a God. It's just there. And that's about what I have to say.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you. Thank you. Insightful.
Concluding thoughts.
We're done, Zeus.
Okay, and then a reminder that Rabbi Siegelman is is starting his series for the Passover Haggadah. I'm going to turn off the recording. It's 1:32. If people want to stay on, Donnie, feel free to go ahead.
Thank you.